You're listening to Beyond Bizarre True Crime, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, I'm Cambo from True Crime Island. I'll be your host today on Beyond Bizarre True Crime. Well, this case is really a bizarre case. It involves the disappearance of John and Linda Sohas, but it's much, much more than that. And anyone that knows me knows that Thailand's my second home. I've met so many secret agents, CIA operatives and ex-SAS in seedy bars in the land of the smiles that if I told you the exact number, I'd have to kill you. Of course, each one of them are just living in their own fantasy world of being someone they wish they were. In this case, the main character also has a bunch of false identities which he will use over decades to lie, cheat, steal, and almost get away with murder. It's 1985 and we go to 1920 Lorraine Road, San Marino, California, the home of Ruth, or as she was known, Dee Dee Sohas. It's here that 27-year-old Jonathan and 28-year-old Linda Sohas were living with John's mum because money had been a bit tight. The home had an external guest house or granny flat, which is what we call them in Australia, where 24-year-old Christopher Chichester was renting. Well, it looks like he was able to live there without actually paying rent. Diddy, she had a bit of a drinking problem and enough money to not let rental arrears bother her that much. When John Sohas met Linda Mayfield, it was his first girlfriend that he'd ever brought home. They got married in 1983 and they got along really well. Linda was an artist and worked at Dangerous Visions bookstore in Sherman Oaks, and John worked in IT. As I said, money was tight, so they moved into Dee Dee's place to save money soon after they were married. Linda and Dee Dee had a little bit of a strained relationship, partly because of Dee Dee's drinking, and John, he was sort of caught in the middle. But things started to turn around for the couple, with Linda having an art show and selling some of her pieces in January of 1985. They bought a new Nissan pickup days later and planned to move out and get a place of their own close by as Dee Dee was getting on in age. A couple of weeks later, Linda called her friend Susan Kaufman to tell her that John had got a job with the government and they were going for an interview in New York. If all worked out, they may even move there. Linda also told Susan that they may also be interested in giving her a job, but she was unable to say anything more about it. Now, Linda and Susan had planned to go to a science fiction convention together in the coming weeks, but Linda assured her that they would be back to pack up all their stuff in time to attend the convention together, as they would only be away for 2 weeks. Susan never saw Linda again. On February the 8th, 85, Linda visited her mum and told her that John had received a job offer working with computers in Connecticut. Linda asked her mum if they could park their new pickup truck there while they were gone, but her mum said no, as she didn't want to have to move it during street cleaning days. Linda organised with her mum to go and see the play Cats on her return. Linda's mum never heard from her daughter again. In February 85, Gary Traverse, who'd bought some of Linda's artwork, called Dee Dee looking for her. Now, Dee Dee let slip that John and Linda had both accepted top-secret government jobs in New York working with satellites, but told him she will get Linda to call him on her return. Now, Linda worked at that bookstore, Dangerous Visions, in Sherman Oaks, and had organised with the owner, Lydia Morano, to open the shop for a few days. However, when Lydia dropped by on one of those days, she saw the shop was closed. This surprised Lydia, as Linda was so reliable. When arranging to get Linda to open the store for those few days, Linda told her that she was going with John very soon on a top-secret mission. Lydia never saw Linda again. Then in March of 85, Linda's sister found out that she hadn't picked up her cats from the boarding kennel. She knew how much Linda loved her cats and thought something wasn't right. She ended up filing a missing persons report on April the 8th. San Marino police officer Thomas Levesque took the missing persons report and performed a basic record search in various databases. He found only the 1920 Lorraine Road address associated with John and Linda, so he went down there and spoke to Dee Dee. Now, she thinks John and Linda are on some sort of secret mission with the government, so she doesn't say much at all. She doesn't want to blow their cover. She tells the police that she knows they are fine because she has a source that keeps her informed and that she can't tell them who her source is. On the 16th of April, Officer George Yankovic goes to the Lorraine Road premises and knocks on the guest house door. Now, he's greeted by a naked man. When Yankovic asks him to put on some clothes, he refuses. He says, "I'm a nudist," and he introduces himself as Christopher Chichester. The conversation doesn't go any further, and Yankovic returns to the station to check up on this weirdo Chichester. Now, Yankovic finds out that he has a California driver's license under the name Christopher Chichester, and also had an AKA of Christian Gerhartsreiter, and that was listed with the Department of Motor Vehicles. In May of 85, Linda's mum gets a postcard from Linda which is postmarked April the 29th, 1985 from France. It read, "Mum, I think we need a geography lesson, but not too bad. Linda and John." Then Linda's friend Sue, who she was supposed to go to the convention with, she gets a postcard as well, postmarked the same day, April 29th, 1985, also from France, and it reads, "Hi Sue, kind of miss New York. Oops, but this can be lived with. John and Linda." Now, Linda's mum is a bit suspicious of this postcard she got. She reckons Linda would write much more than just one line, and there had been no mention previously of going to France. She also wondered how they could afford such a trip, and Linda didn't even have a passport. And this was the same with Sue. Linda had never mentioned France, and she knew the couple just didn't have the money to make such a trip. Also, Lydia, that's Linda's boss from the bookshop, she got a postcard from France. Hers read, "Hi Lydia, not quite New York, but not bad. See you later, Linda and John." Again, Lydia, she knew the couple just didn't have the means to travel to France and had never mentioned they had plans to go there. Now, Lydia rang John's mum Dee Dee, who told her that the couple had gone to Paris. Of course, she just got a postcard the same. After a few months, now Dee Dee, she ends up contacting the police and she puts her own missing persons report in for John and Linda. She's a bit more forthcoming about this secret mission John and Linda were on, telling the police that the so-called secret source was her tenant that was staying in the granny flat out the back, and that he'd now gone missing along with John and Linda's Nissan truck. She told them his name was Christopher Chichester. In July of 85, San Marino police officer Lily Hadesell conducted a database search for John and Linda's truck. It was still registered to Linda at the Lorraine Road address. Now, Officer Hadesell flagged the car in the system, noting it was connected to a missing person. So, at this stage, John and Linda had been missing for around 6 months. John's mum Dee Dee is on the bottle and thinks they're on a secret mission. There was a crazy naked man renting the granny flat out the back of the house. He's disappeared along with the couple's truck. People are getting dodgy postcards from John and Linda from Paris, and the police are not really looking into it as much as they probably should. But that's not all. Shortly after John and Linda are last seen at the house, supposedly going to New York for a couple of weeks, Christopher Chichester offers to one of his acquaintances a rug. Now, when he unrolls it, the buyer notices a big stain on it and asks if it's blood. Now, Christopher, he just calmly rolls up this rug again and he just leaves. He doesn't say anything. Then the neighbours go around to the house and complain about a foul smell coming from the backyard. Christopher's burning carpet. Now, he apologises and puts out the fire. By May of 85, Christopher tells one of his friends he plans on going to Connecticut because of a family problem, and although his friend told him that he also wanted to go back east, Christopher didn't share any contact information with him at all. He also asked his friend where he could dump some drums of chemicals, and he also gave back a chainsaw later that he had borrowed from that same friend. Then on June the 12th, 85, Christopher applied for a post office box in Greenwich, Connecticut, using a driver's license in the name of Christopher Crowe, with authorization for the box to be used by a C. Mountbatten. Okay, so in Connecticut, he would tell people he worked on the 1980s remake of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Christopher Crowe, the name he was going in his time in Connecticut, was actually one of the producers of the show. So, I suppose you can start to see where this is going. Christopher gets a job in IT or at a brokerage firm, but he's fired after they find out the social security number he gave them belonged to David Berkowitz. I think you all know who that is, the son of Sam. He gets a few other jobs, but is either fired or he leaves. Now, he has John and Linda's Nissan truck and tries to offload it, but it's still under finance and still in Linda's name. This causes problem. When he tries to sell it to the son of a preacher man, the sale falls through because it's not his to sell, and he ends up getting a call from the cops inquiring about this pickup. So he calls Christopher to tell him off for the cops coming to his door, and this tips Christopher off. When the police try to investigate further, Christopher's disappeared, but investigations by Greenwich police continue. Christopher, at this stage, is living with a Mihoko Manabe. He's moved into her Manhattan apartment. Then Greenwich police discover Christopher's postbox, and from that they find out he's working at Kidder Peabody, an investment firm on Wall Street in New York City. The cops arrange through Christopher's boss for a meeting, but Christopher smells something's a bit fishy. He agrees to a meeting, but is never seen again. He keeps explaining that he's worried about his parents being kidnapped by a foreign entity every time a meeting is set up. But Christopher's boss gives police the phone number of his girlfriend Mihoko. Now, Christopher tells Mihoko that the cops aren't real cops and that the lives of his parents and his own life is in danger and not to speak with them. He, at this stage, is living off-grid pretty much. Nothing's in his name, everything is in Mihoko's name, and he shreds everything before disposing of it away from the premises. He stops flying and driving and changes his hair colour and starts wearing contact lenses. He also gets rid of his postbox. Now, he had been using additional credit cards issued from Mihoko's account in the name of Clark Rockefeller. Yes, this is just a hint of how bizarre this case is going to get, but more later. Now, it's at this stage that Christopher Chichester is found to actually be Christian Gerhartsreiter by San Marino investigators. Still, there is no reason to believe that John and Linda didn't leave and not come back of their own. There's no evidence of a crime having been committed. So, the case has just gone cold. Now, nothing is heard from John and Linda. The crazy naked guy in Diddy's house is gone, their truck is gone, and Diddy has no idea where it is or when it went missing, and she ends up selling her place at the end of the year to a Roberta Parada, after keeping John and Linda's room as it was when they left. Now, Diddy goes to live in a caravan or a trailer park, probably because of her health. her drinking, and her financial ability to keep living in that big house. Then in 1994, so 9 years down the track, the new owners of 1920 Lorraine Road, San Marino, they decide to get a pool in the backyard. On May the 4th, 94, excavation contractors Jose Perez, his father and his brother start digging the hole for the swimming pool. While Jose was digging with a bobcat, he hit and broke a large fiberglass drum a couple of feet or so underground. Now inside the drum were plastic bags. Jose's father dragged one of the bags to the side of where they were digging and poked at it with a piece of rebar. Inside was a skull and other bones. Police were called. San Marino police officer Joe Lucero responded to the call, and when he got to the property, he saw several plastic bags containing what he was sure were human remains. Physical anthropologist Judith Day, she examined the excavation area. She ended up making 3 sites, with the first being the area where the bag containing the skull was located. The next was the fiberglass drum, and inside that drum was the lower half of a human body in jeans. A pair of shoes was found under the drum. The area to the left of the drum was the third site and included plastic bags containing a human torso covered in a shirt. Now, the remains, as you can imagine, were taken to the coroner's office. There were 2 plastic bags, one inside the other, that contained skull fragments and a column of hair. The fiberglass drum had a pair of jeans wrapped in cellophane with bones within the jeans. There was also a pair of socks and a pair of shoes wrapped in plastic paper. There were another 2 plastic bags, each containing a hand. A shirt containing an arm and torso bones was wrapped in plastic wrapping paper. In amongst it all was a university bookstore at Milwaukee, Wisconsin bag, which was the type of bag used at the bookstore at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee from 79 to 82. Also, there was a Trojan Stores USC bag, which was the same design as the bags used from the USC bookstore from 79 to 1984. Examination of the shirt found with the remains revealed at least 6 one-inch cuts caused by a knife or box cutter. There were 4 cuts on the back to the left shoulder, and the other 2 were on the back of the left sleeve near the elbow. The cuts were either inflicted from behind or from the front if the victim's arm had been raised. The cuts existed before the body decomposed and were not caused by roots, the bobcat, or any mishandling of the remains. Forensic examination of the guest house was performed to look for the presence of blood. The carpet and padding in the main living area was examined and no blood stains were found. But when it was sprayed with luminol, they noticed several large blood stains on the slab floor. Now, 3 of the blood stains had wiping marks, which occur when someone dilutes or wipes away wet blood. DNA testing was not feasible, so no samples were collected. Still, it was believed the remains belonged to John Soas. Now, it would be years before the remains were 100% confirmed to be John's, as he was adopted by Dee Dee, and so they couldn't use her DNA as a reference. An autopsy determined that the skull fractures to the right parietal area and the frontal bone of the skull were caused by severe blunt force trauma. The parietal damage was inflicted before the frontal damage, and each blow was inflicted at or before the moment of John's death. Any of the blows would have incapacitated John or rendered him unconscious and would have caused external and internal bleeding. Now, by the way, no remains of Linda were found on the premises. Okay, so police want to interview this Christopher Chichester, Christopher Crow, or Christian Gerhartsreiter, but they don't have much luck finding him. Until on August 2nd, 2008, a Clark Rockefeller is taken into custody in Baltimore, Maryland for kidnapping his daughter. He was transported to Boston, Massachusetts, where he was formally arrested. At the time of his arrest, he was using the name Chip Smith. After his arrest, Chip told Massachusetts authorities his name was Clark Rockefeller. Now, this is the part where it's going to start to unravel for the mysterious Christopher. And maybe you can see where this is going. I need to now fill you in on a few more details about this Christopher guy. Okay, so we know his real name is Christian Gerhartsreiter. This will be verified by fingerprints on immigration documents from when he came to the United States from Sigsdorf in Germany in 1978 as a foreign exchange student. He was born into a blue-collar family on the 21st of February 1961. He initially stayed with the Savio family in, of all places, Berlin, Connecticut. The Savios eventually booted him out as he acted like everyone should wait hand and foot for him. He would change his speech and accents according to and depending on who he was with at the time. From Christopher Gerhartsreiter, he became Christopher Gerhardt and then Christopher Chichester, telling people it was his family name and his family were wealthy industrialists. In 1981, Amy Gerhard-Dunk married Gerhartsreiter in the request of her sister, who was actually dating him. Amy said she'd never met Gerhartsreiter when he and her sister asked if she would marry him. She agreed, and a couple of weeks later, Amy went to a federal courthouse with him to sign some immigration documents for his green card. He then took off, and she never saw or heard of him again. He told one girlfriend he was going to California to pursue an internship with the film director George Lucas. She got one postcard from him after that, and it was postmarked from Great Britain. But he was actually now living at 1920 Lorraine Road, San Marino, California, at Dee Dee's house. It's here that he was able to con Dee Dee into not paying any rent. As we know, she liked the bottle. He probably used that to tell her that he'd actually paid the rent, but she was just so drunk and had forgotten about it. He made new friends at the Church of Our Saviour just around the corner, telling them that he was a film student at the University of Southern California and that his full name was Christopher Chichester, the 13th Baronet. He was British and he ran the family trust. We know that during his time at Dee Dee's house, John and Linda go missing, and then he also goes missing with Linda's truck, blah, blah, blah. He goes to Connecticut, where under the name of Chris Crow, he tries to sell the Nissan, but fails, and then feels there's too much heat on him, then disappears again. He moves in with Mahoko Manabe and moves into her Manhattan apartment. He has several jobs that he gets fired from or leaves because he thinks the cops are getting close, and these are all high-paying jobs that even he gets, though he has absolutely no formal qualifications at all. Then in February 1993, Chris meets Sandra Boss at a party in New York, introducing himself as Clark Rockefeller. Now, Sandra was studying for an MBA at Harvard Business School. Chris always wore hats in public and explains that he had a high need for privacy because of his famous family, and he was involved in secret government work, doing third world debt renegotiations. He also told her that he'd started a company focused on space travel and military projects, and that he had special expertise in satellites. Jesus Christ! Christopher proposed to Sandra in 1994. She accepted and moved into his New York City apartment, which, from what I can see, was actually Mahoko's place, and that she'd moved out after their relationship broke down. Now, Sandra, she then got a really good paying job. Look, it was a couple of million a year, and so Chris, or Clark as he's known, got credit cards linked to her account and stopped working completely. They were married on the 15th of October 1995, but it wasn't a legal marriage, as Chris hadn't actually done any of the paperwork. He just told Sandra that he had. Then leases and titles to the couple's properties were always in Sandra's name. The couple ended up having a daughter in May of 2001. Now, during this time, Christopher introduced himself as Clark Rockefeller and said he owned a propulsion physics laboratory in Canada and that his company had built a satellite. Look, his and Sandra's marriage eventually broke down because Chris didn't work at all. He was just generally unpleasant around the place. Sandra finally left him in 2007, initiated divorce proceedings, and obtained custody of their daughter. In August 2007, during the divorce, Sandra discovered that Clark Rockefeller, well, that wasn't really his name. It's a bit late now. Okay, so this kidnapping of his daughter while on a visitation day, I'll show you how bizarre this is, and I'm going to read this directly from court records, and I'll just edit it for flow. Arrangements were made for Chris to see his daughter on July the 25th to the 27th, 2008, under the supervision of Howard Yaff, a social worker who was to meet Sandra and the child at the Algonquin Club on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston and take the child for the visit. On Saturday morning, July the 26th, 2008, Yaff took the child to visit with Christopher. Yaff returned with her at approximately 5 p.m. that day. Meanwhile, Christopher had hired a livery car driver, Daryl Hopkins. Now, a livery driver is just the same as a taxi or even a Uber. He organised this in the name of Clark Rockefeller. Now, Christopher told Hopkins that he was planning to go sailing in Rhode Island with his daughter and the son of Rhode Island Senator Lincoln Chaffee. Now, he also told Hopkins that they had to escape the company of a troublesome family friend whom he described as looking like a social worker. That's that Yaff guy. And asked that Hopkins be prepared to do what's necessary to help Christopher get away. Now, Hopkins agreed to help him escape from Yaff, and on Friday the 25th, 2008, Christopher and Hopkins selected a spot on Marlborough Street, Boston, for the pickup. There, Christopher rehearsed jumping into Hopkins' SUV with his daughter. He practiced tossing in his full backpack into the open door, jumping in and shutting it, and off they go. On the morning of Sunday, July 27, 2008, Yaff again met Christopher with the child for the scheduled visit. They went to a park where Christopher made a phone call. Later, when the three were walking down Marlborough Street, Christopher pointed out to a building undergoing construction. When Yaff turned to look, Christopher shoved him in the back. As Yaff stumbled forwards, Hopkins drove to Christopher, and Christopher and the child entered the vehicle. Now, Yaff, he sees all this, he runs to the vehicle in an attempt to stop this Christopher guy from leaving with the child and grabbed the open door. Now, Christopher pulled the door closed and yelled, "Go, go, go!" Now, Hopkins turned and saw Yaff holding onto the vehicle and then sped away. Now, Yaff tried as hard as he could to continue holding onto the door and ran alongside the vehicle, but he was eventually forced to let go and he tumbled to the ground, suffering minor injuries. Now, Christopher directed Hopkins to a convenience store on Revere Street, Boston, and exited the vehicle, telling Hopkins to wait at the store while he took his daughter to Massachusetts General Hospital. Now, Christopher then tossed an envelope containing $2,000 onto the front seat. He and his daughter entered a taxi and they left the city. Approximately 1 week after Christopher abducted his daughter, he was apprehended with her in Baltimore, Maryland by the FBI. Now, he had a boat moored at the Mariner, and the FBI lured him there by getting the Mariner manager to call him and tell him his boat was taking on water. While Christopher was in their custody, he participated in a videotape interview. Now, at the time of his arrest, he was using the name Chip Smith. After his arrest, Christopher told Massachusetts authorities his name was Clark Rockefeller. His true identity was discovered based on his fingerprints. The Sheriff's Department executed a search warrant at a storage facility in Baltimore. The storage unit contained a number of letters, bills, credit cards and checkbooks bearing the name of Clark Rockefeller. There were also 24 unused postcards preserved in plastic sleeves from various destinations. The Sheriff's Department also obtained Christopher's German passport. Now, the passport didn't have any record of him travelling internationally after entering the United States on his student visa in 1978. He would be charged on several counts: custodial kidnapping, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, furnishing a false name to law enforcement officers following an arrest, and another assault charge. The assault with a deadly weapon charge was when he ordered the taxi guy to drive off when the social worker was still hanging on to the door of the car. Now, he would be found guilty of custodial kidnapping and get 4 to 5 years, plus 2 to 3 years for the assault and battery charge. He was acquitted on the other charges. He would serve these sentences concurrently. So, now he's truly busted. Christopher Gerhartsreiter, also known as Christopher Chichester, Chris Crow, Clark Rockefeller and Chip Smith, was inside now for trying to kidnap his daughter. Now, law enforcement would be able to question him now on the disappearance of John and Linda Sohas. In December of 2011, Christopher Gerhartsreiter was charged with the murder of John Sohas, and on January 24, 2012, he was ordered to stand trial. The following year, in April, the trial started and he would be found guilty of the murder of John Sohas and sentenced to 27 years to life. Even though most of the evidence was circumstantial, it all pointed to him as being the perp. The book bags found buried with John's remains were the same type that were used at the two institutions that Christopher studied. These book bags were only available during the time Christopher studied there. Also, he had the Nissan truck that belonged to John and Linda. And remember the chainsaw he borrowed from his friend around the time John and Linda going missing, and the fact that John's body was cut into pieces? Look, he may not have used that chainsaw, but it showed that he possibly had planned on using it, meaning the murder of John was premeditated. Now, sadly, to this day, there's been no sighting of Linda Soers. She is believed to have died at around the same time as John, but her remains have never been found. Well, what a bizarre case. This low-life scum that thought he was better than he was just went through life living a lie, bludgeoning what he could off anyone he could, and took the lives of two young innocent people. Now, the Rockefeller bit, it's a little bit funny. All these people he was able to con, saying he's one of the wealthy Rockefellers, you think someone would have checked him out, especially his wife, Sandra. All the Harvard education, the financial ability, and even she didn't check him out until she was getting a divorce. Now, I know you listeners out there, some of you are actively dating now, and I'm sure when you hook up with someone or find someone, you're going to Facebook them, you're going to Instagram them, straight away, checking them out. Now, she had tons of dough, and you'd think she would have done her due diligence before marrying him, you know. Like I said at the start, I've met many a strange person in my time, just like Christian Gerhartsreiter, that claim to be someone they're not. I often wonder what their real story is and whether they were just spicing up a boring life or have a more sinister background. Well, last I heard, Christian Gerhartsreiter had exhausted all his appeals and was doing time at San Quentin State Prison. One extra note, in 2010, John's remains were formally identified after they found his biological parents. Okay, so that's my take on this bizarre true crime case. If you'd like to hear more of the 160 cases that I've covered on my podcast, just search for True Crime Island on any of your podcatchers, or check out my website, truecrimeisland.com. I have been on my best behaviour tonight for this show, but usually I let it rip in a Cambo rage, be it calling out the perpetrator for the scum they are, or even sometimes the justice system for failing the victims. I say what you're thinking. Now, be sure to tune in for the next episode of Beyond Bizarre True Crime, which will be hosted by Cam and Jen from our True Crime podcast. Good night.
Beyond Bizarre True Crime is produced by Mike Morford and Jess Betancourt for AbJack Entertainment, with music by Connor Betancourt. If you enjoy this podcast, make sure to subscribe wherever you are listening now, and please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can find Beyond Bizarre True Crime on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BeyondBizarreTC. You can also find us on Facebook by searching for Beyond Bizarre True Crime Podcast. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests on Beyond Bizarre True Crime do not necessarily represent those of the show's creators, producers, or sponsors. Be sure to tune in on Saturdays for all new episodes of Beyond Bizarre True Crime.